I am forced into speech because men of science have refused to follow my advice without knowing why. It is altogether against my will that I tell my reasons for opposing this contemplated invasion of the Antarctic, with its vast fossil hunt and its wholesale boring and melting of the ancient ice cap. And I am the more reluctant because my warning may be in vain. Doubt of the real facts, as I must reveal them, is inevitable. Yet, if I suppressed what will seem extravagant and incredible, there would be nothing left. The hitherto withheld photographs, both ordinary and aerial, will count in my favor, for they are damnably vivid and graphic. Still, they will be doubted because of the great lengths to which clever fakery can be carried. The ink drawings, of course, will be jeered at as obvious impostures, notwithstanding a strangeness of technique which art experts ought to remark and puzzle over. In the end, I must rely on the judgment and standing of the few scientific leaders who have, on the one hand, sufficient independence of thought to weigh my data on its own hideously convincing merits, or in the light of certain primordial and highly baffling myth cycles, and on the other hand, sufficient influence to deter the exploring world in general from any rash and overambitious program in the region of those mountains of madness.
hppodcraft.com.
Mountains of madness.
That was the first paragraph of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. I am Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And you are joining us on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
Here at hppodcraft.com. That was a new reader to the show, Joe Freya. Great actor I know out here in Los Angeles. We were doing a show over at this theater out here, Sacred Fools. This kind of thing happens where he's, you're into Lovecraft? And then, an hour later we've been having this late night conversation about, Lovecraft and his stories and when did you start reading them and that kind of thing. It's so funny how many people you wouldn't even know that they're into it, and then suddenly you strike up a friendship totally based on this. It's the strangest thing. So glad to have Joe on the show.
That's a good thing, because I find the opposite of that. Every time I mention to people, I go, oh yeah, I do this podcast about H.P. Lovecraft. They go, who?
Yeah, but they probably already tuned out when you said podcast.
Oh, right. That's probably true. We've added a member to our team here. We have an intern that we have tricked into helping us out with our podcast.
Brooke Burgess. Brooke she was attending the University of Queensland in Australia and is interested in Lovecraft, and she's actually studying it. I didn't know that you could actually do that in school.
Yeah.
And a lot of the notes that we're going to be using on this show were provided by Brooke. So thanks so much, Brooke, and we're glad to have you aboard.
Exactly. And the music also you may recognize from our good friend Reber Clark.
Yeah. So I said, Reber, we really like the music that you gave us before, because, he did this film called Lovecraft Paragraphs, and we used some of that for the Houdini show, and a couple of other times we've used his work. And I said, if you have time, you think you could throw something together? And then a week later, he sends me a CD that's got fully imagined sketches of different scenes from At the Mountains of Madness, and they're all great. So we're using his work as well as some of the earlier stuff he did from Lovecraft Paragraphs in the show throughout. And I think this is probably going to be a multi-part episode. Do you think we can get through this in one?
I think we probably do this just in one episode.
Yeah. Actually, we'll probably have some time to spare.
No, this is going to be, we'll see how long, but it's definitely going to be more than 4 episodes.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
This is my maybe third time reading this book, and every time I do it, I'm surprised at how long it is.
Yeah, it's long.
Is it Lovecraft's longest work? It's got to be.
I think so, yeah.
Although I think The Mound took me about 2 weeks to get through.
The Mound just seems like Lovecraft's longest work.
Yeah.
But I think The Mountains of Madness actually is the most words, along with The Case of Charles Dexter Ward and The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
Dream Quest flew by for me, though, because that's God, I love that.
That reminds me, Chad, that somebody posted on our Facebook page, there is a sketch comedy show, and it's called Burniston.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a Scottish show or whatever. I don't know exactly what it is, and they have this kind of Lovecraftian sketch where a guy goes to his landlord or his management, and he's just got like this unknowable thing in his basement. It's really funny.
I've got an unnameable thing in my basement, and I want it punted. But as it relates to Dream Quest, I think enough people are aware of Lovecraft that they get the unnameable thing or how he refuses to describe stuff. But it's when he said haven't you filed a complaint before? And he's like, yeah. My neighbors, there was a bunch of bizarre chanting over there, but my neighbors keep getting taken up to the moon by cats, so I don't have to worry about it. That's so specific. I mean, I think maybe people who listen to the show got it, but that's probably it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of people who listen to the show, there are more of them all the time. And people know that before we did our last episodes on Whisper, we had to move to a new server. After that, which I thought was kind of the end of it, our bandwidth has been going crazy, which we love. That's great. But it's actually starting to... I feel like you and I are roommates again, and we got to pony up rent. This thing used to be cheap, and every month now we got to figure out how to pay for it. We need to raise some more money. In that vein, or what we've decided to do is another ransom for another reading. Yeah, we've agreed on that, right?
We've agreed. We are doing two short story readings. One will be Cool Air, which is one of my favorites, and my wife is going to be reading it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Keeping it in the family. Well, we're also going to do The Cats of Ulthar, which... my wife is going to be reading.
Hey,
so,
look at that.
It's going to be the other Pfeiffer and Lackey bringing you some H.P. Lovecraft. All-female cast. Yeah. It's going to be good stuff. The Cats of Ulthar and Cool Air. Heather Klinke and Rachel Lackey together again for the first time doing some Lovecraftian readings. So we're going to reach $1,000. We're going to release that. We're already working on it, and that'll pay for us for a couple of months. Also, we're talking internally, and the marketing department for our company here exists. It's you and me, and we're terrible at it.
Yes,
so
we're really bad.
We really need to get it together and go out to some folks and try and get some sponsorships. But we just wanted to announce on the show. If anybody who's listening to the show who thinks maybe they've got a game or a book or anything like that they'd like us to promote, we're happy to do it.
A monster truck rally.
Whatever it is, man. We'll do it. One thing that I do want to promote is, you remember Graham Eberhardt? You know that guy?
I do. Do I know that guy? Of course I do. He's at my wedding, for crying out loud.
Well, he has some new fiction coming out he asked me to mention on the show, so I'm going to do that right now. It's How the West Was Weird, Volume 2. This is an anthology put out by Pulpwork Press. And right now they're holding a contest where you can win a free copy of How the West Was Weird Volume 2 if you review Volume 1 on Amazon. And we'll put up a link to Pulpwork Press and how you can get the book. But if you go there and review it, you might get a new copy. Now, the book, it's got 20 short stories which blend the traditional Western with robots and dinosaurs and aliens and werewolves and all kinds of good weird fiction stuff, right? Yeah. What we all like. One of the stories in Volume 2 was written by Graham. Yeah. And for people who listen to the show, he had the displeasure of reading The Moonbog and The Quest of Iranon. Quest of Iranon in particular, I think he didn't like. He actually wrote me and he said he's deeply sorry as they are terrible, terrible stories. And he also wanted me to mention that he's pretty sure he mispronounced the word islet and hopes listeners can forgive him for that. I don't think they will, but...
No. There's no forgiving. Hey, Chad, that was a really good example right there of us doing an ad.
Yeah, it sounded really natural.
It did, yeah.
We should get started.
The story starts off with an unnamed narrator, who we eventually find out is named Fred Dryer.
Dryer? Dyer. What? Wait, who's Fred Dryer?
Fred Dryer's from Hunter. Oh no, my mistake. William Dyer is his name.
Hey, Hunter, man. I love Hunter so much.
Moving on, William Dyer is a geology professor from Miskatonic University. Now, we don't actually get his full name until Shadow Out of Time.
Oh, really? Well, he's not referred to in here?
He is referred to, like people.
But not. We don't get his full name. We just get his last name.
Yeah,
man,
that's a whole other story that we'll talk about. Which
there's such a richness to this material. I mean, as we go on and you see the connections, and there's more and more of them. You really understand the world building that Lovecraft was doing. And I know some of it's inconsistent because he would change his mind about things or just use whatever served the story. But it really has been a payoff to go through all of these one by one,
It has.
And this one in particular, At the Mountains of Madness, contains so much sort of prehistory, and we were talking about this before we started doing the show, the demythologizing of the mythos.
Right, yeah.
This is what Robert Price and S.T. Joshi have talked about.
Kind of Lovecraft's earlier stuff is very supernatural. It's a lot of magic, a lot of gods and things like that. And the demythologizing of it makes it, instead of gods, into alien life forms that we just don't understand. Instead of magic, it's just technology. That's sort of the way things were in the last story as well, Whisper in Darkness, where there was a lot of this folklore, and that folklore was kind of bent into this science fiction-y, alien culture, society, civilization, all that stuff. Specifically, he takes things that he's written about before, and we'll point this out as they pop up, and explain them in a more scientific way.
There's this spirit at the beginning of the story. He clearly has he's in love with the Antarctic and the Antarctic Ocean, and clearly he has just read and read and read about this stuff. You would think that parts of the story, for my taste, I wouldn't like because it kind of goes on, and you do get a little bored during this book sometimes, but he really does get you on his side. You get the spirit of adventure. Like, you really want to know, what are these guys doing? It's crazy. They're going out into this bizarre wilderness.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of neat because I feel like Arctic expeditions are so close to what I had always envisioned interstellar travel like, because it's such an alien landscape and you can't survive out there unless you bring stuff with you.
Yeah, you're not going out there in a tank top.
No, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, you'll die.
Yes. Well, you've got to just plan that. You got to plan your food. You got to plan your fuel. Your housing. All that stuff. And it's just such an unforgiving landscape that it's really interesting. And I wasn't really that into Arctic exploration stuff until I read the story, and then I got really interested in it. And Lovecraft was into it ever since he was a kid. Paul of Paul Cthulhu fame. He has the original National Geographic that Lovecraft also owned, not the exact same copy, but that edition of it, where he got most of his information from this expedition that he often refers to in the story.
Oh, cool.
Lovecraft is really hard with the facts in this because obviously he really loves it. But into the story here, he mentions that he's going with Miskatonic University, and he's being accompanied by Frank Peabody, who is a geologist.
Now, you say Peabody as I was reading this, because I frequently don't pronounce things right. He was Peabody in my head.
Well, yeah, I always thought so too. But it wasn't until I read some notes that Joshi made that Lovecraft said specifically about this name. Where'd you get this name? Lovecraft said, I chose it as a name typical of good old New England stock, yet not sufficiently common to sound conventional or hackneyed.
Okay.
And then it says here, the more common spelling is Peabody, spelled P-A-B-O-D-Y.
So it's Peabody.
It's Peabody.
Well, that gives me some backstory on that character. He has had to correct people his whole life.
Yes.
My name is Peabody.
This geologist that's going on this expedition with him designed a really awesome drill, which is super light and able to go on these expeditions because usually these drills are these big things. They have these super cool airplanes that are made of duralumin, which is a composite of aluminum, copper, magnesium, and manganese.
Adamantium.
And adamantium. But no, wait, hold on. It's normally these things were made of wood before, but the wood would get, when it got cold, it would break and just fall apart and couldn't take, smashing into ice. It would but this stuff will dent and bend, which is good.
Oh, okay.
So they're planning on going down to the Antarctic via the Ross Sea, and they wanted to get some rocks and soil samples and all that stuff. Peabody had come up with using hot electrified copper rods to melt through the ice because there's huge glaciers that are hundreds and hundreds of feet thick that you have to get through that to actually to the soil samples that are underneath. Lots of detail about this type of thing.
Well, yeah, but it's a great idea to have your geologist as the main character because I imagine that this is just what he's preoccupied with all the time. He's not Indiana Jones. He likes rocks.
He likes rocks.
And geology is the study of deep time. It's the study of how things change over vast amounts of time.
Right.
It's actually a very interesting portal into the whole notion of what what's revealed to us as we go through. He's the perfect main character because you have to really understand things in a kind of cyclopean scale, right? I mean, the written history is a very short amount of time, actually.
Oh, yeah.
What do we have? Like 4,000 years, basically. We're starting to understand humanity a little better now that we're getting into DNA and that kind of thing. But for a geologist, that's a drop in the bucket.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, I was terrible in geology in school, by the way. I was terrible.
They should have geology students read this story.
They should.
Get them excited about it.
Yeah, that'll get them excited, sure.
Back to the story. Dyer's explaining to us about what's going on. This is all from his perspective. He kind of keeps dropping hints about this thing that has happened and why he's telling his story now. There's this Starkmore Meriwether expedition that's going to be taking off for the Antarctic, and he is trying to persuade them not to go. The story we're reading is Dyer's argument not to go. And he talks about how, you've probably heard about this first expedition from the press. It was in the Arkham Advisor. It was in the Associated Press. They had wireless updates. Kind of a big deal. You might have heard about this stuff. Well, it wasn't the whole story. But I'm going to give you the whole story, the unedited version of it.
Now, if I read this and I was an explorer, I'd be like, screw you. This sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm going down.
It has the opposite effect. But he's trying to say, this is the reason you shouldn't go.
At this point in the story, we kind of get a breakdown of what the whole team is going to be and, who's in it. We've got William Dyer and Frank Peabody. Those guys are two geologists. Lake, who is a professor of biology, and Atwood, who's a physics and meteorology guy. And with them are going to be 16 assistants, 7 grad students, 9 mechanics, and they're going to all be loaded onto 2 ships, which are ex-whalers, called the Arkham and the Miskatonic.
Awesome.
I'm excited. I'm super excited about all this stuff.
Yeah,
it's like an adventure. They're loading up the stuff, but they're also loading on these planes, which they're going to put together when they get down to the Arctic. It's just so neat.
Now, one of the grad students is a guy named Danforth. I don't think he gets introduced quite yet.
No, Danforth, not yet. Not yet. Danforth comes in and they kind of introduce him and he seems very cool.
He's my guy, yeah. And when I'm reading the story, I'm always thinking about Danforth.
But we're not here yet. We don't.
Okay.
Danforth's not yet entered. They leave Boston Harbor on September 2nd, 1930. They reach the Arctic Circle by October 20th. Now, of course, being in the South, the summer is the winter, our winter. It's for their summer, even though it's our winter. And they're down there because they're going to have longer days. It's going to be much, much warmer. And they'll actually be able to get the ships down there. As they get past the Antarctic Circle, they see all these beautiful snow-capped mountains, and they get to this specific mountain range called the Admiralty Range, which is a real mountain range. All these things are real locations that Lovecraft actually read about.
Right. And then what about the last lap of the voyage?
The last lap of the voyage was vivid and fancy-stirring. Great barren peaks of mystery looming up constantly against the west as the low northern sun of noon, or the still lower horizon-grazing southern sun of midnight, poured its hazy, reddish rays over the white snow, bluish ice and water lanes, and black bits of exposed granite slope. Through the desolate summits swept raging intermittent gusts of terrible Antarctic wind, whose cadences sometimes held vague suggestions of a wild and half-sentient musical piping, with notes extending over a wide range, and which, for some subconscious mnemonic reason, seemed to me disquieting, and even dimly terrible. Something about the scene reminded me of the strange and disturbing Asian paintings of Nicholas Roerich, and of the still stranger and more disturbing descriptions of the evilly fabled Plateau of Leng, which occurred in the dreaded Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul Ahazred. I was rather sorry, later on, that I had ever looked into that monstrous book at the college library.
So let's talk a little bit about Nicholas Roerich, who is mentioned a lot of times in the
Yeah.
story. Lovecraft had seen his paintings in person in 1930 when he was living in New York City.
Yeah.
There's a little quote he wrote from a letter to his buddy James Morton where he said, "Better than the Surrealists is good old Nick Roerich, whose joint at Riverside Drive and 103rd Street is one of my shrines in the pest zone." What the hell does the pest zone mean? Is this some part of New York where he just thinks there's a lot of immigrants or something and he doesn't want to go down there?
Probably.
Wow. He goes on to say, "There is something in this handling of perspective and atmosphere which to me suggests other dimensions and alien orders of being, or at least the gateways leading to such. Those fantastic carven stones and lonely upland deserts, those ominous, almost sentient lines and jagged pinnacles, and above all those curious, cubical edifices clinging to precipitous slopes and edging upward to forbidden needle-like peaks." We'll put some links up to some of this art, but when you see it, it really gives you a good context for some of the things that are going to happen later in the story. It looks like futurism a little bit, but it just looks bizarre, the way that these giant cubes are set against the mountains. He brings it up again and again, and I almost feel bad for a reader who doesn't have the internet, or, these are things that'd be very difficult to go see if you have no, and he references them as if you've seen them.
Now, another thing that I want to bring up here, just within the case of the story in Lovecraft's world, this is something that jarred me, is when he brings up the Necronomicon and that he has read it.
I know.
He's a geologist. Why is he reading the Necronomicon?
It just gets passed around that school, man.
I guess so.
Everybody reads it at some point. We talked about it in Whisper. I mean, it's just something.
He's a folklorist, so I get it, okay? Maybe there's a connection with the occult and folklore and mythology and all this stuff. He's a geologist. Why is he reading it? Is there geological excerpts from the Necronomicon? Is there...
I think it's just a good read. I think the thing about the Necronomicon that nobody really talks about, honestly, is that it's just an awesome read. Like, you can't put it down. Every time you think one thing's going to happen, another thing happens. You know, it's one of those things where you lay down, I'm just going to read this for a half hour, and then it's 4 in the morning. You're like, I got to work tomorrow. I've been up reading the Necronomicon all goddamn night.
Oh, yes.
There's right around that paragraph that we just heard. Wait, he says something that really made me laugh about penguins. Oh, yeah. Myriads of grotesque penguins squawked and flapped their fins. Penguins are like the cutest animals. Brooke, when she was taking notes, she wrote this, among the many descriptions of penguins he has in there, this is the most menacing description of cute animals I've read. He would make the worst nature documentary narrator.
Okay, so back to the story. They're moving down further. They're still on their journey. They get to Mount Erebus and Mount Terror, which is the actual place. These are actual places.
10,900 feet in altitude.
That's right.
Now extinct as a volcano. Yeah.
Erebus is a volcano, or and it's not active, but there's puffs of smoke coming out of it. And this is when we get introduced to Danforth. he's kind of, they're maybe up on the deck. And in Ian's graphic novel, they kind of have a scene here. He rewrites it a little bit, by the way. Ian Colbert.
Who
Ian
is
Colbert.
this guy?
He's the guy who did the amazing graphic novel adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness.
Ah, yes. And actually, I think Ian's going to join us at some point on our journey.
He is going to join us, yes, on a later episode. We couldn't get him schedule-wise tonight. In a couple weeks, we're going to have him, so we're going to get his input on it. But he's got a great scene where Danforth and Dyer are on the deck of the ship, and it's kind of the sun is setting, and it's kind of really cool looking and everything like that. And Danforth, kind of mentions that this is what probably inspired Poe, this mountain right here, when he wrote the Arthur Gordon Pym.
It's such an interesting connection because, and I think Poe is more than maybe Dunsany is more an influence on him, but in his heart, Lovecraft is just the Poe guy. I mean, he loves him, and he's the one that's carrying on that tradition of Poe and of weird fiction in America. But Poe didn't write any novels except for Arthur Gordon Pym, which is very long. It's sort of like his Candide. It's a crazy adventure that this guy from Nantucket goes on. And it's interesting that that's so closely connected to Lovecraft's only real novel, which is At the Mountains of Madness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess Charles Dexter Ward is too, but this was published in his lifetime. I mean, this was his thing. This is what he put out, and it's in a lot of ways a summation of all the work he'd done beforehand. Now, I haven't read Arthur Gordon Pym. Shamefully, I've never gotten into it, but I know that it's a guy that accidentally gets on a ship and goes on this crazy adventure, and in the end, it really focuses heavily on the Antarctic.
This is a quote that Danforth gives: "The lavas that restlessly roll their sulphurous currents down Yanak, in the ultimate climes of the pole that groan as they roll down Mount Yanak, in the realms of the boreal pole." This is the inspiration to what Poe wrote, this mountain that you're looking at right now. And then, of course, Dyer's like, "Oh, I'm a big Poe fan too. You're a Poe fan?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah." And they totally hit it off, and they become really big pals. But which is interesting, you were talking about Lovecraft being a big Poe guy.
Yeah.
This connection to the Yanak and Mount Erebus was made by Lovecraft. Like, nobody ever connected those two things together. And so that's like Lovecraft's kind of contribution to scholarship on Poe. Thomas Mabbitt wrote Lovecraft as a Student of Poe, where he talks about a bunch of things that Lovecraft kind of put together.
Yeah, and there's a few things in this actual text that are important. I know that in Pym, there are these cannibals, the Tslalians. We're murdering everything in this. Tslalians, I think is what they're called. But they're like these savage natives, and they have all sorts of different bizarre things that they chant. But at one point in the story, they say, "Tekalili, Tekalili," and that becomes very important in this story later.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh, really? You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, it's directly lifted from Pym. I actually got my complete works of Poe out. The Kindle is a great thing, and it's a bad thing at the same time. Because I'll say this: I read At the Mountains of Madness this time on the Kindle.
Yeah.
And the best part of that is that there's that dictionary in it. So anytime I didn't know what something was, I could quickly look it up. I didn't have to get up. I'm just laying in bed reading it. Wonderful. But at the same time, when I picked up my Poe, which I actually have in book form, I'm looking for Tekalili in the story because I was like, I just want to find out what part he says this. And I was so frustrated I couldn't just search for it. You know what I mean? Like I had to actually turn pages and use my eyes. It was just driving me nuts.
So lazy you've become.
I know.
You're just like those guys from the Mound.
Yeah, exactly.
Technology has made you lazy.
Well, it happens in this story as well. I mean, the other things, they used to be able to travel in interstellar space, and then they forget how to do it. I'm sorry.
Hey, you're jumping the gun, Pally. When they get to this area, which is called Ross Island, they get their small boats, and then they start unloading everything from the ships, from the Arkham and so on. They've got all their dogs and their sledges. Lovecraft uses the word sledges in here instead of sleds. Mm-hmm. But when I'm in the UK, everybody, like when we would go sledding in the wintertime, they go sledging here.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn you, Lovecraft. What's wrong with America? Why are you such an Anglophile?
Such an Anglophile.
Well, when this got published, this story got turned down by Weird Tales, right?
It did. It did get turned down by Weird Tales.
It did get accepted by Astounding Stories.
Right.
But it was heavily edited. And one of the edits that drove Lovecraft crazy was that they Americanized his spelling.
All of it, yeah.
Yeah, they probably corrected sledges even. I don't know. I haven't seen that text.
No.
But,
well, it's kind of an interesting thing because they don't have his original text that he sent to them. So all that we know that exists is what he kind of made some notes on his version that he got back from them, like made some notes in the margins and things like that. And also has the typeset of Lovecraft's of this story.
Okay.
But we don't actually know what it is. And Joshi's tried to piece together as best he could what he thought would, put things back the way Lovecraft would have written them and all those types of things. So what is usually floating around is the right version or the most right version.
So it's the corrections that he then made notes on to try and kind of get it back to what he wanted, and that's what we have.
Yeah.
But we don't have that original thing. Actually, there's a funny quote. Joshi wrote this: HPL's long paragraphs are split up, punctuation was altered, and toward the end, several passages amounting to about 1,000 words were omitted.
Whoa.
HPL fumed at the alterations, calling the editor, Tremaine, that goddamn dung of a hyena.
Whoa! Dung of a hyena.
Yeah, that's what he called the editor.
Wow.
Yeah. I got to say, writers out there, editors are good people. They are trying to help you.
Yeah.
You can't be so sensitive. I think that Lovecraft was just used to writing his books and leaving them, putting them in a drawer. But you need editors, man. You do. And I'm going to be that guy that says it. The story is probably better served. What they cut was probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Because even within the story as I read it now, there are repetitions that are unnecessary.
Right.
I wish somebody was coming in there with a machete and putting it in shape. But whatever, that's just my opinion. I like editors.
Yes. Chad, what's your job again? What do you do?
I'm an editor.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, moving on. The plan is they're going to try and get everything done, all of their research done in the summertime.
Uh-huh.
So by winter, they can get out of there. They make plans, just in case things take longer, to send the Miskatonic, the ship, not the city, up north before the winter hits. And then they'll bunk down and camp out down there for the winter. When they get there, it's not that cold, really. It's only about 20 or 25 degrees above zero, which is, pretty close to New England winters. So they're all like, hey, this is pretty cool, pretty easy breezy.
I did like that part of the story, though. Hey, this is the way we roll in New England.
Right.
What, you think this cold scares us? Please.
They're going to move everything down to a camp about 700 miles south. That's their plan. They're setting up this kind of temporary base where they unload everything and kind of start packing up stuff. But while they're there, waiting for the planes and everything to get set up, they go out and take some samples and get to work. These guys are scientists. They're down here. They're excited, all that stuff. So on November 21st, they finally fly down. And it takes 4 hours for them to fly there. They set up their new camp and start taking some samples, and they find some ferns and seaweeds and gastropods and all types of stuff. They're super excited. Everything's going great. On January 6th, 1931, Lake, Peabody, and Daniels, and 6 students and 4 mechanics, they go fly over the South Pole. Just for fun, I guess, really.
Yeah.
Well, not just for fun, but they want to see if they can see anything new that nobody else has seen, because very few humans have ever been down that far.
That's got to be pretty freaking exciting, man.
Yeah. Because who knows what you're going to find. Maybe you're going to find an ancient alien city.
You might, but I just imagine that it has such a feeling of both humility and pure enthusiasm to see things that have never been seen.
Well, one of the quotes I really like here, it says, "Distant mountains floated in the sky as enchanted cities, and often the whole white world would dissolve into a gold, silver, and scarlet land of Dunsanian dreams and adventurous expectancy under the magic of low midnight sun."
Actually, the low midnight sun is a great kind of word picture, but why is he just assuming that everybody's read Lord Dunsany or however you pronounce it? I mean, it's this thread that goes through all his writing. He's like, you read those. You know what I'm talking about, right? No, Lovecraft, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, maybe he does that to try and get people to read some Dunsany.
Which is cool. He's almost like Tarantino in a way. I'm actually not kidding. Like, you go and see one of his movies, it's full of references to other filmmakers, and you can go and enjoy the movie, and it's fine. And then you get embarrassed by your film nerd friend who's like, "Oh, you didn't get the reference to these 5 World War II movies?" Well, I've seen all of them. You're just like, "Oh, okay." He was referencing something I didn't get. But the story is still good, whether you know it or not.
Right, exactly. The plan was that they would set up this camp that was about 700 miles south, and they're going to later, after a few months, move about 500 miles eastward. Everybody's in good shape. Everything's fine. Their health is strong. They've got lots of lime juice.
Yeah.
Atwood they're glad they have him down there because he has all these ways of making shelters for the airplanes and setting up windbreaks with snow blocks and doing all this. It's just going great. Couldn't be a better.
I know. I wish he wasn't writing about how great it was going. He has that sentence. He says, "Our good luck and efficiency had indeed been almost uncanny." You're just asking for to happen, man.
Exactly. So, everything's going great. However, Lake wants those guys, you remember Lake, he's the biologist, it says he thinks that they should go westward for a very specific reason, because they found these triangular markings in slate. that are contradicting everything they ever understood about nature and geology.
He was strangely convinced that the marking was the print of some bulky, unknown, and radically unclassifiable organism of considerably advanced evolution, notwithstanding that the rock which bore it was of so vastly ancient a date. Cambrian, if not actually Precambrian, has to preclude the probable existence not only of all highly evolved life, but of any life at all above the unicellular, or at most the trilobite stage. These fragments, with their odd marking, must have been 500 million to 1,000 million years old.
1,000 million.
What he's saying here, Chad, if you didn't understand those
Explain
words,
to me. Break it down.
is that there's some footprints, some big kind of markings or of a large animal or creature before there were large creatures on the planet.
Yeah.
There were like single-celled organisms that existed.
That's all that should have been around.
Exactly.
And yet
They're finding this big, huge footprint, using that word loosely.
Yeah.
This is crazy.
You know, you make a joke saying, Chad, if you didn't understand those words, but I do have to say that while I was listening to that quote, I get this anxiety every time I see the word organism in a paragraph.
I thought you were going to say orgasm.
Well, yeah. Do you remember when you, like, in
do.
class, you would have to read aloud sometimes, and you take turns, and it was in science class, and if you ever had a paragraph that had the word organism in it, you'd look at it with just this total fear because you're just convinced you're going to say the word orgasm in front of the whole class.
Exactly. No, that's happened. That's happened. Not to me. I've been in class when it's happened to other kids.
Me too.
Yeah.
But I mean, so yeah, I'm glad you did spell it out for me because I was really distracted while I was listening to that quote.
And that ends the first chapter.
It ends the first chapter, and actually, it ends this first episode of At the Mountains of Madness. Now, our plan here had been to get through
The first two
chapters.
But we've just been having so much fun. We're going to let this take as long as it's going to take.
And we'll probably speed it up as we go along, but
We like this story, and there's a lot of interesting things that to talk about.
Yes.
So, why not?
exactly.
Why not?
So let me say this. I want to thank Joe Fria for doing our readings.
Yes.
I want to thank Brooke Burgess for providing some of the excellent notes on the story that she provided for us. I also want to thank our third member of the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast, Mr. Michael Mann.
Oh, yes. Without him, we would have been totally screwed,
Yeah.
and this podcast would be not existing anymore because Chad and I would have not been able to figure out what we were supposed to do
Yeah.
when our internet provider said you can't do these things.
Yeah, and the new site design is awesome.
Yeah.
It's all
Great
creepy
stuff.
and green. And he just put some new designs in our Cafe Press store as well. So that's a good place to go and buy some gear and support Mike Mann. Reber Clark. Yeah,
Reber.
of course. This is good stuff, man. I feel like I'm on an adventure when I'm listening to it, you know?
Good job, man. Good job. And with that, I am Chris Lackey.
And I'm Chad Pfeiffer
And this has been the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
at hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com.